Nostalgia. To get Webster's dictionary definition out of the way, a wistful or excessively sentimental yearning for a return to or some past period or irrecoverable condition. But for the more interesting capitalistic definition, it's a money-printing machine fueled by our need for an extension of our childhoods. And talk about genius, because if there is anything I want more as a full-time worker at a fast food chain and college student, it's an extension of my childhood. And I'm not alone, as nostalgic marketing has grown immensely throughout the past 2 decades. We have Adobe mimicking Bob Ross, Cookie Monster baking in an Apple ad, Hasbro bringing back Furbies, Coca-Cola re-released Surge for a year, Spotify advertising The Never-Ending Story, and the whole Grimace thing. It's powerful and effective. As Trey Allen says in our reading, The Branding Power of Nostalgia Where It Can Take You. For him, something as simple as the smell of a number 2 pencil brings him to the wonder and excitement he had as a kid. And while I can argue that the scent of a number 2 pencil doesn't match the nostalgic value of the taste of crayons, both evoke that powerful feeling I want to delve into today. The power of nostalgia. And speaking of power...
Nintendo, now you're playing with power.
Now you're playing with power was the catchphrase used by the video game company Nintendo during most of the Nintendo Entertainment System's lifespan. Many of us know what the NES is. To explain it short, it's what your grandpa is talking about when he says kids do nothing but play on their Nintendo all day. During the 1980s, this wasn't just a video console. It was a household item, selling 62 million units worldwide. Single-handedly reviving the video game industry, Nintendo became an icon. Few competitors could match Nintendo's dominance, and they continued to shape gaming for decades. The SNES, Nintendo 64, GameCube, Wii, Nintendo was soaring through consoles, and although not all were record hits, each continued Nintendo's legacy as the crown jewel in gaming. However, they knew that a select group would yearn for the simpler days of Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt. They were biding their time for that group's nostalgia to grow large and ready to hook them all in, line and sinker. So, you can probably imagine how this ties in with what I mentioned earlier. A company releases a product that people love, it eventually fades out, and then nostalgia sets in, leading the company to resell the same product to that group of consumers. What sets this apart from the companies I discussed earlier? Well, Adobe didn't rely on their Bob Ross spin-off to save the company. Cookie Monster didn't resurrect Apple all by himself. The fate of Hasbro wasn't solely dependent on the relaunch of a Furby. I don't know what's up with Grimace. What distinguishes Nintendo is that they reveal nostalgia's true power during the most critical times, using it to revive their company from the brink of collapse. From 2013 through 2016, Nintendo faced a challenging time. Their new console, the Wii U, was a massive failure, selling less than half the amount of its competitors' consoles. Nintendo was in trouble. Bad trouble. However, buried in their history was a golden ticket, waiting for the perfect moment. And in 2016, they played it. The NES Classic Mini, a 5-inch replica of the original console, lacking the ability to play game cartridges. Instead, it has a pre-selected 30 games downloaded onto the system. The picture quality is decent, the console is plug and play and requires no additional power source. It is fairly competent in all it does and launched at a fair $60. The games didn't matter though. You could play most of these games on any other Nintendo console at the time. No one was asking for another way to play The Legend of Zelda. We already had that. But the advertising. Oh boy. The release trailer tells you all. The sound of a cartridge entering the slot, the buzz of a CRTV, the excessive use of neon, 8-bit music, and a space-filled background mimicking arcade themes in the 1980s. This advertisement has the power to make me nostalgic for a time I wasn't even born in. In a study for the Visual Communication Journal, numerous aspects of the NES Classic Mini are divided into different sections based on how they play on gamers' nostalgia for the 1980s. The researchers touch on the packaging and typography of the ad, recreating the logo and the name of the console in the same print as its original. Another big feature playing towards nostalgia was the use of company mascots, such as Mario and Kirby, which elicited reactions from those who played corresponding games as kids. It connects consumers to a recognizable face of their childhood that brings them joy and ties in with one of nostalgia's most potent abilities. Our readings show that nostalgia doesn't just make people reminisce about a long forgotten time, but also boosts self-esteem and optimism. Nintendo's nostalgic advertising drives people to buy the product of the commercial because the mere commercial alone makes them feel confident and reinvigorated by their past. And as for the reactions to the product, well, it's safe to say that the product was well loved. So, with the immensely popular release of the NES Classic Edition, Nintendo fought its way out of a slump and showcased just how powerful nostalgia is. It showcases what you once loved about a company, brand, or product and excites you for the future. Suddenly, the failures don't matter because you know there was good in a company that made you feel this happy as a kid. I'm not gonna lie to you guys and say nostalgia hasn't ever been used this way before, to reignite something in our past and strike the same sense as it did before. We've seen Star Wars use characters and motifs, Polaroids came back big time, and somehow denim is even crazier than it was in the 1980s. We've all heard it before, the 80s is coming back, the past is now. And, all this nostalgia can feel a bit overbearing at times. In an article in Psychology Today, Penn State University professor Kevin Bennett states, "Nostalgia often encourages conformity. We mimic trends, fashions, and behaviors from the past even if they no longer align with our true selves. Authenticity suffers when we prioritize fitting into a nostalgic mold over expressing our unique identities. And I think it's very easy for companies and brands to fall into the same trap, relying on nostalgia as a scapegoat for genuine creativity. And it's why Nintendo's use is so special to me. I don't feel like I'm being catered towards." Time and effort went into this mini NES because they knew they were failing by straying too far from the path they had initially set. This console was a restart, a statement of their understanding and willingness to make things right, and they did just that. The following console, the Nintendo Switch, sold 146 million units as of November 2024. That's 10 times the amount of the Wii U's. And one of the very first design philosophies was focusing on the core values set by the Nintendo Entertainment System. Nostalgia is fun. It's comforting. It lets us relive the best parts of our past. But eventually, the past stops being enough. Companies that rely too much on nostalgia risk losing the very spark that made them special in the first place. Nintendo didn't just remind us of what we loved, they used nostalgia as a foundation to build something new. And that's the real power of nostalgia. Not to dwell on the past, but to inspire the future.